With the regular season for the Detroit Lions getting set to wrap up within the next couple of days, the Lions are now getting set for their next goal, which is obviously the playoffs and ultimately to get to the Super Bowl. But they just received news that is absolutely insane, and we're going to talk about it. So stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10, 5, end zone, touchdown, Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. My friends, for today's episode, I'm going to try my best to keep it short. I'm going to try my best to keep it simple. And we're just going to go from there. Because when we talk about the Detroit Lions, road to the Super Bowl, their whole journey, their aspirations, their goals, they have definitely checked off already a lot of those boxes. I mean, for crying out loud, they've set a new franchise record for most wins in a season. They're very, very close to setting up a second division title. They're very close to getting the number one overall seed. There's a lot of things that they have either already checked off or are about to check off. But there's one thing they checked off this year that I don't think anybody was expecting them to do. I don't think anybody was even thinking about it. I don't think anybody even thought about it being a big thing. What exactly am I talking about? What I'm talking about is that the Detroit Lions, they have become the 11th team since the NFL merger, which if I recall correctly happened in 1970, that has won all of their away games in a season. So they were undefeated in an entirety of a season playing football while on the road. So think about that, folks. Since the NFL merger, which again, if I recall correctly, happened in 1970, which we are talking about almost 55 years, there have only been 11 teams that have gone on the road and have won every single game to be undefeated over the course of the season. The Lions are the most recent addition of being the 11th one. Who are the other 10? The other 10 are the 72 Dolphins, the 82 Redskins, the 84 49ers, the 89 49ers, the 1990 49ers, the 2001 Rams, the 2007 Patriots, the 2014 Cowboys, the 2016 Patriots, and the 2020 Chiefs. Now, there's a reason why I specifically brought up every single team out of all 10. Some of you ought to have already picked up on something from as soon as I said some of those teams. The first 4 teams that I mentioned, 72 Dolphins, 82 Redskins, 84 49ers, and the 89 49ers, all of those teams that went undefeated on the road in this regular season went on to win the Super Bowl. In fact, out of the 10 teams prior to the Detroit Lions this year, 5 out of the 10 teams that went undefeated on the road in the regular season went on to win the Super Bowl. And then to add even further to that, out of the 10 teams, 8 out of the 10 actually got to the Super Bowl. So there were 3 teams that got to the Super Bowl and lost, but 5 out of 10 got to the Super Bowl and won. So think about that in the most basic, most rudimentary, most simplified terms imaginable. For the Lions haven't accomplished something that has literally only been done once, if you really want to do the averages, once every 5 years, which that is not exactly a very common feat to happen over a 54, 55-year period. You are talking about the Lions over that span of 10 teams over those 50 plus years, they have at a very bare minimum, at least according to this, 50% of winning the Super Bowl. But they have an 80% chance of just getting to the Super Bowl. That right there ought to inspire the ever-living hell out of Lions fans, and it ought to terrify the ever-living hell out of a lot of teams that they're going to have to play, because teams already know that the Lions are a very difficult opponent. They're very hard to win against. But when you consider the parallelism, you consider the drawback to the comparisons of history of all of these teams that have gone to the Super Bowl that have not had a single loss on the road during their regular season, it makes the argument that much more compelling. But again, that is not the total point of this argument. That is not the total breadth and scope of it. There is plenty more here, my friends, because here's what's even more crazy. The 5 teams that I mentioned that won the Super Bowl that had no losses on the road during their regular season. 72 Dolphins, 82 Redskins, 84 49ers, 89 49ers, and the 2016 Patriots. Okay. Of those 5 teams, 4 of those teams had a loss during the regular season. The only exception to that rule is the 72 Dolphins, who are the only perfect team in the entirety of NFL history. So I decided to ask myself, I said, okay, as of the current moment, the Lions have 2 losses. The point differential for the Lions during those 2 losses is 10 points, because we lost 20-16 against the Bucs in week 2, and we lost 48-42 against the Bills. So 6 plus 4 is 10 points. I then decided to ask myself, I said, okay, how many games other than the 1972 Dolphins, who didn't lose any games, how many games did the 82 Redskins, 84 49ers, 89 49ers, and 2016 Patriots lose? The answer for each one of those is that the Redskins lost 1 game, the 84 49ers lost 1 game, the 89 49ers lost 2 games, and the 2016 Patriots lost 2 games. So I said, okay, if the Lions' point differential in their 2 losses is 10 points, what is the point differential for all of those other teams that I just mentioned that currently, that we know, did not lose an away game during the entirety of their regular season have in the losses that they did have? What is their point differential? When you take a look at the 82 Redskins, their point differential for their losses was 14 points. For the 84 49ers, it was a meager 3 points. And for the 89 49ers, it was only a slight 2-point differential increase in that. It was 5 points. And then there's the 2016 Patriots, who their point differential was 24 points in their losses. Now, why is that important? The reason that that is important is because you have to think about it this way, folks. The measure of a team is not only how many games you can win, but how close you can keep games when you play opposing teams. Because let's call it for what it is. There have been plenty of teams that have gone 13-3, 14-2, 15-1, or now with the new system, it's 15-2, 14-3, whatever the hell you want to call it. They've won a lot of games. But when you take a look at their losses, the point differential in those losses can sometimes show that, okay, they can win against teams that are not necessarily the best, but when they go up against a really good team, they get their asses handed to them. For the Lions to not only have not lost a single away game this year, but if you were to do the ranking of the other 4 teams that I just mentioned, the Lions are ranked 3rd out of all 5 teams in terms of how many points they've given up in their losses. Number 1 would be the 84 49ers. Number 2 would be the 89 49ers. Number 3 would be us. Number 4 would be the 82 Redskins, and bringing up the rear would be the 2016 Patriots. So what does that tell me? What does that tell you? It tells me that not only are the Lions good at going on the road and winning games, but when they do actually happen to lose, it's not like they're getting their asses handed to them. They are fighting, they are coming close to winning games. It's not as if they're being completely outmatched. Now, some people are going to want to tell me that the Bills game, they were outmatched and it was garbage time points. I'm not going to buy that. I don't care how you want to try and argue that point. The point of the matter is the Bills kept their starters out there. We kept our starters out there. It was not garbage time. That is the difference. If it's garbage time, that means that typically the other team is pulling their starters and putting in their backups. And let's put this into further perspective. Our defense was playing with backups of backups, and we still kept the game within 6 points because our offense kept fighting. So, garbage time stats, not even damn close. So, for those that want to try and make that argument, you better freaking reevaluate yourself. Now, when we go further into this and we take an even deeper look at the numbers, there's even more evidence that supports that the Lions not only can get to the Super Bowl, but will likely win the Super Bowl. When we take a look at all teams that I mentioned with the 2024 Lions, I decided to go even further with the numbers, and I said, okay, here. How many points did each team give up defensively, and how many points did each team score offensively? And then let's take a look at the differential between the offensive points scored versus the defensive points given up. I'm going to put those numbers up on the screen here. What you're going to notice is this. The Detroit Lions are the number one team out of all 5 teams that had a loss during the regular season, but yet at the same time did not lose any away games. They had the number one offense in scoring with 533 points. However, though, they have the worst defense in terms of points given up with 333. But what makes this an interesting argument is that the Lions have the second best point differential between the two out of all 5 teams, with 200 points separating between their offensive points that they have scored versus the defensive points they have given up. That is a very interesting thing to note because when you take a look at the other teams, who is the other team that is just ahead of them in terms of the point differential between offense and defense? It's the 1984 49ers. And that was a pretty damn good team. And if I recall correctly, that was the year that I think the 49ers might have gone to the freaking Pontiac Silverdome to play the Cincinnati Bengals. I could be wrong. It might have been that year or it might have been 1981. I can't remember. But the point of the matter is that once again, there's even more evidence that supports that, okay, even though the Lions have given up the most points on defense, they are still having such a great offensive output that it really is not making much difference because when you are literally only 48 points removed in terms of differential between offense and defense to the 1984 49ers, one of the best teams in NFL history, that's saying something. And when you take a look at all the other teams in their in terms of their point differentials between their offensive points, defensive points, it makes the Lions' argument and my argument in this episode that much stronger. So, just to put this into further perspective, because I know some people are going to say, well, David, you're kind of rushing through that. You saying that the Lions have given up the most points out of those 5 teams. Isn't that a little bit concerning? No, it's not, because let me show you this. When you take a look and you put those numbers in the proper perspective of the individual season that those teams were in, you get a much different idea of what that truly means. For the Detroit Lions, not only were they the number one offense in comparison to the other 4 teams of the 5 that I compared, this year they are the number one scoring offense, and even though they've given up 333 points, which was ranked 5th out of those other 4 teams, that's the 9th best defense in terms of points given up. So you're talking about a top 10 defense, and you're talking about the best offense in football. That's pretty damn special. Then when you start taking a look at the other teams, the 2016 Patriots, that year they were the 3rd best offense in football, the number 1 defense in football. The 1989 49ers, number 1 offense in football, number 3 defense in football. The 84 49ers, the team that I said that they were the closest to in the point differential, number 2 offense, number 1 defense. And then finally bringing up the rear is the 1982 Redskins, which the reason why their numbers look so skewed between this compilation of data and the last compilation of data is because they played during a strike season. They only played 9 games, so their numbers are nowhere near as close. But even then, they still had the number 1 defense. What does this tell me? It tells me that the Lions are an excellent company. You have a top 10 defense in points given up, and you have the best offense in points scored. You are an excellent company. You are doing just fine. So again, further information, further data that supports this argument. Now, I'm going to say this. There's even more data on top of that. Because what truly makes me believe that the Lions can and win the Super Bowl out of all of this is this last bit of crazy information. I decided to take the 1982 Redskins out of this data compilation and comparison because, like I said, the 1982 Redskins, they played during a strike-shortened year, so their stats are not anywhere close compared to the rest. So I said, okay, comparing the 84 and 89 49ers and the 2016 Patriots with the 2024 Lions, let's take a look at the offensive playmakers in terms of the passing game and in terms of the rushing attack, which is what I'm primarily going to be looking at is the quarterbacks and the running backs. When you take a look at the 1984 49ers, the team, again, that I keep trying to get people to understand has the very closest resemblance in terms of point differential and also in terms of the offensive and defensive prowess. Take a look at how Joe Montana did that year with the freaking San Francisco 49ers. He was number 2 in the NFL that year in completion percentage. He was ranked 6th in passing yards. He was ranked 2nd in passing average per throw, ranked 3rd in passing touchdowns, and ranked 2nd in passer rating. And if anybody knows anything about NFL history, you ought to remember that 1984 was the year that Dan Marino set the first 5,000-yard passing season. So the fact that Joe Montana's numbers are still as good as they are, despite Dan Marino setting most of the passing records that would now be comparable to what's going on in the current NFL day and age, that's impressive for Joe Montana. But what makes it even more impressive is this. The 1984 49ers are also very comparable to the Lions because out of all of the other teams, the 89 49ers and the 2016 Patriots, they're the only team that had a dual running back threat, much like how the Lions for the majority of this year have had a dual running back threat. You go back to 1984, the 2 running backs that the 49ers used that year was a guy by the name of Tyler, and obviously Roger Craig. Tyler was the running back. Craig was the fullback that year. I'm going to put both of their numbers up, but when you take a look at it, you ought to see a very interesting comparison. The attempts are pretty much the same as Jahmyr Gibbs right now for Tyler. Same for yards, same for average. The rushing touchdowns are not. But again, 3 out of 4 are very comparable to Gibbs. That's very interesting. When you take a look at Roger Craig's numbers that year, they're very comparable to what freaking David Montgomery's numbers are. Even though Montgomery's a running back, Roger Craig was a fullback, and he put up very similar numbers to David Montgomery. Again, besides the rushing touchdowns. And then, just to continue on this gravy train, you take a look at the 1989 49ers. Again, take a look at Joe Montana that year. Number 1 in completion percentage, number 8 in passing yards, number 1 in pass average per throw, number 4 in passing touchdowns, number 1 in passer rating. Gee, you're seeing a pattern here. When it comes to Joe Montana in both 84 and 89, he is a top 10, damn near top 5 quarterback in terms of rankings. I wonder how that's going to look when we take a look at Jared Goff's numbers here in a moment or two. Just giving you guys a little heads up there. When you take a look at Roger Craig's numbers in the 1989 season, again, he was the sole running back that did the majority of the carries for the team. But again, you're talking about a running back that made a difference, much like how Jahmyr Gibbs has made a difference for us this year, despite the fact that we haven't had David Montgomery for the last couple of games. Roger Craig in 1989 was ranked 10th in rushes that he did, actual total rushes, 10th in rushing yards. He didn't have the greatest year in rush average, but again, he also had a decent year in terms of rushing touchdowns. My point of the matter is this. there are a lot of similarities. I'm not saying I'm not saying it's a perfect comparison, but there's a lot of similarities between these teams that went undefeated on the road, had great offenses, and also had pretty damn good defenses, whether it's in terms of the individualistic players or it's in terms of the overall team comparison. And it's not just with the 49ers. Let's go to the Patriots in 2016. When you go to the Patriots in 2016, now, this is going to be a little bit different than the previous two teams because for Tom Brady, who was the quarterback in 2016 for the Patriots, he had to sit out the first 4 games because of the Deflategate controversy. He was suspended for that. But even despite that suspension where he missed 4 games, Tom Brady was ranked 5th in the NFL that year in completion percentage, ranked 2nd in pass average per throw, tied 7th in passing touchdowns, and ranked 2nd in passer rating. The only thing that was not in the top 10s was the passing yards, which was ranked 20th, which let's think about it here. When you're missing 4 games of production, that's typically going to happen. But when you have everything else that's top 10 or, dare I say, top 3 or 5, let that again tell you just how damn productive Tom Brady was that year. And then when you take a look at the rushing comparison, again, LeGarrette Blount was the running back that year. Number 2 in the NFL in total rushes, ranked 8th in rushing yards. Again, not very good in terms of rushing average, but 18 rushing touchdowns was number 1 that year. So why am I showing all of these very specific stats in circumstance and comparison connection to these teams that I'm talking about when comparing the Detroit Lions? The reason why is because when you take a look at the 1989 and you take a look at the 2016 Patriots, pardon me, both of those teams, as I just demonstrated, heavily reliant on their passing attacks to score. But why do I bring that up? Because the 1984 freaking 49ers, which had a great passing attack, but also a great rushing attack to provide a balanced offense with yet an also very good defense, very much is related to what the Lions are right now. And I will prove it here as I wrap this episode up. Because when you take a look at the 2024 Lions, obviously we know we are talking about Jared Goff and we are talking about Gibbs and Monty, Sonic and Knuckles. Take a look at Jared Goff's numbers, and what I'm going to do after I put those numbers up, I'm going to give you guys a side-by-side comparison so that way you can see the ranking differential between Jared Goff this year and Joe Montana in 1984, which, oh, by the way, Jared Goff's boyhood hero, his boyhood idol as far as a quarterback, was Joe Montana, hence the reason why he wears number 16. Jared Goff this year, tied 2nd in completion percentage, ranked 2nd in passing yards, ranked 2nd in pass average per throw, ranked 4th in passing touchdowns, ranked 2nd in passer rating, and even though QBR was not available in 1984, he's ranked 8th in that category. You're talking about Jared Goff, who, besides the QBR ranking, he is a top 5 quarterback, almost a top 3, top 2 quarterback. You're talking about a guy that is playing at an unprecedented level. But when you take a look at Gibbs and Monty and you put that even in comparison with Joe Montana from 1984 with his duo of Tyler and Craig, it's even more crazy. It's more insane, the comparison. Again, take a look at Gibbs, ranked 16th in rushes, but ranked 6th in rushing yards, ranked 3rd in rushing average, and tied 6th in rushing touchdowns. When you take a look at Monty, ranked 24th in rushes, ranked 29th in rushing yards, tied 18th in rush per average, and tied 7th in rushing touchdowns. The comparison here is absolutely damn eerie. It's bonkers. The whole point I'm trying to get at here when I'm trying to drive this point to the furthest extent that I can with comparing the 2024 season that the Lions have had with no losses on the road with those of the 84-89 49ers, the 2016 Patriots, plus also the 82 Redskins is this. The Lions have accomplished a lot of the same things that those teams have, but the one thing that makes them different from those teams, that I'm going to have this whole thing wrapped up on is that while the Lions have accomplished all this, much the same way that those teams I've mentioned have, they've done one thing that's different. Their defense has been completely depleted with injuries, whereas the 2016 Patriots, no such thing. The 84, 89 49ers, no such thing really. And the 82 Redskins, not really anything there either. Maybe an injury here or there, but nothing of super significance. So the fact that the Lions have done what they have done, despite having a defensive roster that is depleted with injuries and yet still maintain the same style of excellence that those other Super Bowl teams I've talked about in this episode have done, that is showing how crazy insane the Lions' chances are to not only get to the Super Bowl, but to win the Super Bowl. If you can do the exact same thing that 4 or 5 other freaking Super Bowl teams have done in terms of not losing a single road game, and you have a defensive roster that is on backups of backups for most of the time, that means you're special. That means that you are in a class, you are in a club all of your own. Anyway, I have said my piece. Hopefully you guys got something out of this episode worthwhile. So I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching in another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do any of these 3 things: like, comment, and subscribe. Also want to encourage y'all, if you've not done so yet, but you subscribed in the past, please make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that way you guys never miss any more content I push out. Also want to encourage y'all, please, to share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook. Share it anywhere and everywhere you possibly can. I also want to encourage y'all, please, if you all like the content, please, I want to highly hear from you guys. I hope you all did like the content, whether it's your first time viewing me or you guys have been viewing me for a long time. I hope you all got something out of it. Hope everybody out there has something that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.